Before we begin, let me tell you something. Sometimes silence carries the loudest truths. Sometimes a smile hides years of betrayal. And sometimes a woman reaches her limit in the quietest way imaginable. What happens when the one who gave everything finally decides to take everything back? Stay until the end and don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. They say you don't notice the exact moment something ends, especially when it ends quietly. There's no explosion, no dramatic collapse. It just fades like the last flicker of a candle before the darkness takes over. That's what my marriage felt like. A slow extinction stretched out over years. My name is Carolyn Whitaker. I'm a mother of two and a wife, at least on paper, to a man I barely recognize anymore. We live in a modest colonial-style house in a quiet suburb just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of neighborhood with perfectly trimmed hedges and friendly neighbors you smile at, but never truly know. From the outside, we look picture perfect. But the real truth is buried so deep beneath years of silence that even I forgot where it all began. It was the first night of summer break. We were supposed to celebrate. The house smelled like my homemade meatloaf, and I even lit candles, the way I used to in the early years. But Richard barely looked up from his phone. When he finally did, he set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and said with a smirk that didn't match his flat tone, "You're just not fun anymore, Carolyn. I don't even know who I'm married to." He said it like he was commenting on the weather. No anger, no emotion, just indifference. And the worst part? Our grown children didn't even react. Daniel laughed awkwardly, his eyes still glued to sports highlights on his phone. Emily raised an eyebrow, took a sip of her soda, and changed the subject to her new Pilates instructor. I sat there in that candlelit kitchen I'd scrubbed spotless, and realized no one really saw me anymore. Not truly. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Richard snored beside me like nothing had happened. My thoughts spun wildly, loud and restless, like a dryer on its last cycle. 30 years. 3 decades. I had given up a career in graphic design to raise our children, support his ambitions, manage the home, and somehow I had become a shadow in my own life. He used to bring me wildflowers from the gas station when we were broke and 22. Now he barely remembered my birthday. I tried to make excuses. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe I was the one who changed. But deep down, something felt rotten, like a piece of fruit that still looks perfect on the outside, but you know better than to bite into. The next morning, he left early for a work meeting. As he walked out of the room, I saw a text flash across his screen. A woman's name. A heart emoji. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I watched. I observed. And the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. The distance, the lies, the way he flinched when I touched his arm. I started noticing another woman's perfume on his collars, finding unfamiliar earrings in the laundry, receipts for expensive dinners I hadn't been invited to. I wasn't stupid. I was just tired of pretending to be. But it wasn't only him. It was all of them. My own children treated me like wallpaper, decorative, quiet, easy to ignore. They came to me when they needed money, advice, or a shoulder to cry on. But not once did they ask how I was doing, not once. So eventually, I stopped asking. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed softly, the only sound in the house. I poured myself a glass of wine, pulled out an old photo album, and flipped through the years. There we were, smiling, arms wrapped around each other. New babies, birthdays, road trips. A whole life captured in glossy pages, but behind every photo, I could see the moment things began to fade. That night, I made a decision. If no one was going to notice my pain, I would make sure they remembered my absence. Not with violence, not with rage, but with the quiet strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Because sometimes, when a woman breaks, she doesn't scream. She plans, and I had just started planning. I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. Still, there's something about betrayal that burns differently when you finally see it in full color. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I finally trusted my instincts instead of brushing them aside. Richard had been different lately, more careful, or maybe just more distant. Either way, something had shifted. He started getting dressed where I couldn't see him, coming home later than usual, texting in the garage, and his cologne suddenly smelled stronger, like he was trying to cover something up. So I did something I never imagined I would do. When he left for work, I checked his coat pocket. Not his phone, just his coat. I told myself that if I didn't find anything, I'd feel foolish but relieved. But I did find something, a folded receipt from a boutique hotel in Asheville. 2 nights, a suite upgrade, a champagne add-on. I hadn't been to Asheville in 5 years. The date on the receipt was last weekend. I sat on the edge of our bed holding that piece of paper like a confession letter. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at it and felt something inside me harden, not break, harden. That was the moment I began to detach. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. When he left for work, I checked our shared calendar. No meetings. When he said he had an out-of-town appointment, I looked at the GPS history on our shared car, something I hadn't even realized I could access. He hadn't gone to work. He'd driven 2 hours away to meet someone, and not once did he call to check on me. Not once did he even lie convincingly. He didn't try. It was as if I had become so invisible that he forgot I could still see. What hurt most wasn't the affair itself. It was how easily he discarded me. Like an old pair of house slippers he could replace without a second thought. There was a time he couldn't go an hour without holding my hand in public. Now he couldn't look me in the eye without blinking away guilt, and my children were oblivious. I tried to hint at what was happening. Emily rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, you overthink everything." Daniel told me to relax, that Dad was just stressed. They defended him. They dismissed me. And in that moment, I realized how completely alone I was inside my own family. I kept every receipt I found, every suspicious timestamp. I made copies of everything, not out of anger, but out of necessity. That's when I remembered the prenup Richard had insisted on before we married. At the time, I'd laughed. "You're the one with nothing," I'd told him. But I signed it anyway. What he didn't remember, or maybe never fully read, was the infidelity clause. If he ever cheated, I got everything. The house, the savings, the car. He'd laughed back then, confident he'd never betray me. I never thought I'd need that clause. Until now, I began moving through my own home like a ghost, documenting, recording, watching. I stopped making small talk. I stopped cooking his favorite meals. I went to bed early and woke up before anyone else. I wasn't angry, I was focused. He noticed the change. One evening, he asked if I was okay. I looked at him for a long moment, quiet and steady. Then I smiled and lied, "I'm just tired." Tired didn't even come close. I was exhausted from giving so much of myself for so many years, only to be pushed aside like I never mattered. The woman he once loved had become a stranger in his eyes, a stranger he didn't bother trying to rediscover, but that stranger was learning how to reclaim herself. In the stillness of my hurt, I began imagining the moment I'd finally stop pretending. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with shouting or tears. No, something quieter. Something he'd never see coming, because men like Richard never expect the quiet ones to leave. And they certainly don't imagine we'll do it with a smile. It happened in the middle of a grocery store. I was standing in the pasta aisle, staring at 2 jars of sauce, one on sale. One not, when the thought hit me, why am I still choosing based on what he likes? He hated mushrooms, so I'd always avoided the chunky sauce. But I love mushrooms. I've loved them since I was 12. And yet, for 30 years, I'd silenced even my own taste buds for him. I put the mushroom sauce into the cart. It felt like a declaration of war, small, invisible to everyone else. But to me, it was my first open rebellion. That night, I served it with garlic bread and I waited. Richard walked in, loosened his tie, and sat across from me without saying a word. He took one bite, then froze mid-chew. "You know I don't like mushrooms," I smiled. "I know." He stared at me, confused, but didn't say anything else. I watched him finish every bite. By then, I had already started researching flights, cheap ones. One-way tickets. I chose Cartagena for a reason. It looked stunning on postcards, far enough away that coming back wouldn't be easy, and exotic enough to sound like the kind of soul-searching trip a man like Richard would think he deserved. A few days later, I introduced the idea over breakfast. I buttered toast I didn't even want and said, "I've been thinking. Maybe we should take some time apart. Just a little space. You've said things feel off. Maybe being alone would help." He didn't look up from his phone. Like a break, I nodded. "You could go somewhere. Clear your head." "I'll stay here and think things through." He blinked. "You'd be okay with that?" "Of course," I said softly. "I want you to find your joy again." His eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not because of me, but because of the idea of escape. He didn't ask many questions. That's the thing about men who've already moved on. They don't get suspicious when you step aside. They think they've already won. I maxed out what was left on my credit card and bought him the cheapest one-way flight I could find. Cartagena, Colombia, midweek, midday, no insurance. I printed a fake itinerary, hotels that didn't exist, tours that were never booked. I told him I'd planned everything as a gift, that he deserved something nice for once. He beamed like a boy with a brand new toy. What I didn't say, what I would never say, was that I knew he was taking her. I'd seen her picture once by accident. A woman maybe 10 years younger than me. All high heels and highlighted hair, lips too glossy, a laugh that felt rehearsed. I didn't know how long it had been going on. And I didn't care anymore. Let her go with him. Let her hear him snore, watch him lie, see him disappear into his phone halfway through dinner. Let her learn how charm turns into condescension after 6 months. Let her meet the man behind the performance. Let her be stuck in a foreign country with the real Richard. While they packed their summer clothes and counted down the days, I smiled quietly and played the role of the perfect wife. The night before his flight, he asked, "Are you sure about this?" "I feel a little guilty going without you." I touched his hand. "I want this for you. I really do." I didn't sleep that night, not from guilt, but from adrenaline. I had never done anything this calculated, this deliberate. And I knew there was no turning back. The next morning, I drove him to the airport. He kissed my cheek and promised to come back with answers. I smiled and waved as he disappeared into the security line. Then I turned my phone off. Not airplane mode off. Powered down. SIM card removed. Every contact blocked. Emails forwarded to a new address. It felt like erasing a ghost from a haunted house. For the first time in decades, I breathed air that hadn't already passed through someone else's lungs. When I got home, the house was silent. No television humming. No doors slamming. No passive-aggressive sighs drifting across the room. Just silence, not lonely silence. Free silence. I made myself tea and sat on the back porch as the sun filtered through the trees. Richard was on a plane, chasing freedom, completely unaware that he was flying straight into a trap of his own making. Let the games begin. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing exactly what's coming and watching someone walk straight into it. Completely clueless, Richard texted once during his layover something bland like, "Almost there. Thanks again, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The word turned my stomach. I didn't reply. I imagined him checking his phone again and again, wondering if the Wi-Fi was acting up. By the time he landed in Cartagena, I had poured myself a glass of wine, put my feet up, and shut down every possible way he could reach me. He didn't know it yet, but his trip had already begun to unravel. I could picture it clearly, him striding through customs, arrogance leading the way, the sun blazing down on that overpriced button-up he always wore for travel days. And that was only the beginning. He was probably thinking about how spontaneous and exciting the trip made him feel, convincing himself he was still a man full of life, not an aging executive cheating on his wife. But Cartagena wasn't waiting for him with open arms. I made sure of that. There was no hotel reservation, no city tour, no private car service or spa package. Everything I had booked was nothing more than a fawed, a careful patchwork of fake confirmations and dead-end phone numbers. A beautiful illusion designed to collapse the moment he tried to rely on it. He didn't call right away. Maybe he was too embarrassed to admit that nothing was lining up. Or maybe he still believed it was a glitch, that he'd misread the emails or booked something wrong. But by the second day, the messages started coming faster. "Hey, I think something's wrong with the hotel booking. Caroline, can you check the confirmation email? They say they don't have us listed. The tour company never showed up. Can you call from your end?" I read every message. I watched the typing dots appear, disappear, then appear again. I didn't block him yet. I wanted him to feel the delay, that invisible distance stretching wider with every unanswered attempt. By the third day, the tone changed. "Caroline, this isn't funny. Where the hell are you? I'm stranded here. You're seriously not going to answer me?" And then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the name. He accidentally included her in a message meant for me. "Maya's really upset. She thinks I lied. Are you seriously doing this?" Maya. So that was her name, and she was there with him, probably standing over his shoulder while he typed, trying to keep control of a situation that was slipping through his fingers. I pictured her face when she realized they didn't have a place to stay, that the hotel didn't exist, that their romantic escape had turned into a logistical nightmare. I imagined the looks between them, the blame beginning to surface, the cracks widening. He thought he was escaping the dullness of marriage. Instead, I gave him something he would never forget. That evening, I blocked his number. The next morning, I received an email from a mutual friend, Greg, a former colleague of Richard's. The subject line read, "Can you help him?" I didn't open it. They could figure out their own rescue plan while they scrambled. I packed a single suitcase and called a cab. My cruise was waiting, a 7-day luxury voyage through the Caribbean, all-inclusive, adults only, sunrise yoga, sunset jazz. I had booked it months earlier as a quiet backup plan, a place to go once the trap was sprung. The moment I stepped onto that ship, the weight of years slid off my shoulders like an old, heavy coat. I wasn't the woman waiting at home anymore. I was the woman who left on her own terms, with her own name, her own mind, and her own peace. From the deck, I watched the coastline fade into the distance and thought about Richard. How he must be sweating in the cheap hostel I'd carefully chosen for him on TripAdvisor. How Maya must be panicking, realizing she'd tied her dreams to a man who couldn't even secure a vacation without using someone else's credit card. Let them squirm. Let them learn. Let them see what happens when the woman you cast aside stops playing along. And for the first time in years, I laughed not because it was funny but because I finally could. I don't know how long he lasted before everything started to collapse. 3 days, 4? From what I eventually pieced together, it didn't take long for the heat, confusion, and weight of consequence to settle squarely on Richard's shoulders. The last message I read before blocking him completely was half panicked, half pleading. He said they were trying to make it work at a small hostel a few miles from the city center, and that it was less than ideal. I'd researched that hostel myself. 2 stars. No air conditioning. Multiple reviews mentioned a broken shower and loud street noise all night. He didn't include those details, of course, but I imagined them vividly. No luxury breakfasts. No ocean views. No champagne-soaked nights. Just 2 people sweating in a windowless room, blaming each other more with every passing hour. And while Richard and Maya struggled to understand what had happened, I ordered a second mimosa by the pool deck and watched the ocean sparkle like scattered diamonds around me. I wasn't thinking about revenge. This wasn't revenge. It was education. It was experience. It was the kind of lesson no one ever expected me to be bold enough to teach. People think suffering has to be loud screaming, slammed doors, things breaking, flames rising. Mine wasn't like that. Mine was silence. On the 4th day of my cruise, just before dinner, I overheard a man behind me on the deck arguing on his phone in Spanish. His voice was sharp and emotional, climbing with every sentence. I didn't understand most of it, but one word cut through clearly: gringa, white woman. It made me wonder if Maya had already left. Later that evening, I found out she had. The news came from an unexpected place. My daughter, Emily, she texted me while I was halfway through a seafood risotto in the ship's formal dining room. Dad's been trying to get a hold of you. Something about being stranded. Did you actually send him to Colombia? I let the message sit for a while before replying. Then I typed back, I thought a break would do him good. Her response came almost instantly. Mom. He says she left him. He's out of money. He says he's sleeping in some horrible place. You have to at least talk to him. That was the moment I knew Maya had cracked. And I felt it, the quiet, almost cruel satisfaction of justice finally unfolding. I never asked why she left. I didn't care. Maybe she saw him begging friends for money over WhatsApp. Maybe he yelled one too many times. Maybe she realized excitement fades quickly when you're surrounded by discomfort and reality. Whatever it was, she was gone, and Richard was stranded, humiliated, broke, alone. I finished my dinner, ordered dessert, and sent one final message before turning my phone off again. He took the trip he asked for. I just helped him pack. The next day, the ship docked at a private island. I swam for the first time in years, letting salt water soak my hair, my skin, my clothes. I floated on my back and stared up at the sky, nothing above me but wind and drifting clouds. All I could think was, I am finally free of him, but I wasn't finished yet. Because when he got back, if he got back, he would learn the final part of the lesson. And it would hurt far more than sleeping on a roach-infested hostel cot. It would arrive wrapped in cardboard, sitting on a driveway beneath a sky that didn't care who you used to be. And I would not be there to soften the blow. The ocean has a way of washing things clean, not just your skin, but your soul. That week at sea wasn't just a vacation. It was a resurrection. Every morning, sunlight poured through the balcony windows of my cabin, carried in by a salty breeze and the distant rhythm of waves against the hull. I stopped setting alarms. I stopped checking emails. I stopped wondering what Richard was doing, how uncomfortable his cot was. Whether Maya had truly left or was just threatening to, I didn't need to know anymore. For the first time, I was living in a world where his choices no longer controlled the temperature of my day. The first time someone on the ship called me ma'am, I didn't flinch. It used to make me feel old, invisible. This time, I wore it like armor. I wasn't shrinking under the weight of time. I was expanding into space I had forgotten was mine. At the open deck lounge, I met other women, all older than me. Some divorced, some widowed. All of us tired of carrying the invisible weight of everyone else's expectations. We shared drinks and laughter, traded stories that were equal parts heartbreaking and healing. There was Margaret from Chicago, who left her husband after finding a second phone hidden in the closet. Janine from Oregon, whose daughter stopped speaking to her when she refused to co-sign another credit card. Teresa, a retired nurse who came on the cruise alone after her husband died and discovered she liked herself more than she ever had when he was alive. I didn't tell them everything, but I told them enough. None of them gasped. None of them judged. They just nodded, sipped their drinks, and said, "Good for you." One afternoon, I sat alone on the sun deck with a notebook and wrote a list titled Things I Forgot I Loved. Sketching mornings without chaos. Cooking for pleasure, not praise. Walking barefoot on cold floors. Jazz at night. Mushrooms on pizza. No one ever asks a wife what she misses about herself. They only ask what she misses about her husband, but I didn't miss Richard. What I missed was the woman I used to be before I spent decades shape-shifting into whatever everyone else needed me to be. I started imagining a new life. Not a fantasy. Not a dramatic reinvention. Just a quieter, steadier version of myself. A woman who didn't apologize for taking up space. One who didn't flinch when people were disappointed. One who knew exactly where she stood. The cruise docked in Miami on a Sunday. I stepped off the ship with sun-kissed skin to new books in my bag, and no intention of ever returning to the version of myself who waited by the phone. When I got home, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was mine. I brewed coffee in the middle of the afternoon and played old records in the kitchen while I unpacked. I opened the windows and let fresh air move through the house like a reset. Then I opened the closet and began packing his things one box at a time, neatly, calmly, without malice. Without tears, I folded his shirts the way I had 100 times before. Only this time, I did it for me. The closet became mine again. I cleared the bathroom cabinets, the garage shelf, the bedside drawers. By nightfall, the house no longer looked like a place we shared. It looked like somewhere a man used to live, and the next day, he would return from paradise lost. From betrayal turned back on itself and learn what it feels like to be removed from a life you never appreciated. I wasn't angry, I was prepared. Because closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from a locked door, a garage stacked with cardboard boxes, and the quiet certainty that you're finally free. The doorbell rang once. Just one solitary chime. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, sipping black coffee. I didn't rush. I didn't flinch. I walked slowly to the front window, pulled the curtain back just enough, and there he was. Richard. He looked nothing like the man who had left 2 weeks earlier. His shirt was wrinkled, clinging to him in sweat-darkened patches. His hair, always so carefully styled, lay flat and greasy. The bags under his eyes were so deep they looked like they were holding decades, not days. He stood in front of a stack of cardboard boxes, 9 of them, each one packed by my hands. Taped shut, labeled clearly, books, winter clothes, office junk. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was efficient, practical, final. He rang the bell again. Then knocked. Carolyn, he called. I didn't answer. He stepped back and looked at the house, our house. The one I'd inherited from my parents. The one he'd convinced me to refinance, but never managed to put his name on. He knocked again. Harder. Carolyn, what the hell is going on? I walked to the door, opened it halfway, and stood behind the screen. I didn't unlock it. I didn't step outside. He blinked. You packed up the whole house? No, I said calmly. Just your part of it. His face flushed, caught somewhere between confusion and outrage. You can't just throw me out. I raised an eyebrow. According to our prenup, which you insisted on, I absolutely can. He opened his mouth, closed it. He knew I was right. He just never expected me to actually do it. And that was the truth of it, wasn't it? He never expected me to do anything. You can't be serious, he said, his voice rising. We've been married 30 years. 30 years ago, I said quietly. I thought that meant something. His fists clenched at his sides. I could see the tension tightening his shoulders. I lost everything over there, he snapped. You sent me into a damn nightmare. Maya left the second things got hard. I had to beg Greg for money just to get home. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. You said I wasn't fun anymore, I replied evenly. So I gave you an adventure. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. This isn't fair, he hissed. That word fair almost made me laugh. Fair? I repeated. Fair is me staying home while you played house with someone else. Fair is me carrying this family for decades while you treated me like a houseplant. Don't talk to me about fair, Richard. His mouth opened again, closed. I glanced past him at the boxes. I paid for a moving truck. It'll be here in an hour. You don't need to come inside. You can't just erase me like this. I met his eyes, calm and steady. I didn't erase you, I said. You erased yourself. I stepped out from behind the screen and finally unlocked the door, but I didn't invite him inside. I just moved forward until we were standing face to face. I'm not erasing you, Richard, I said. I'm just putting you exactly where you belong, outside. He stared at me, and something in his eyes finally cracked. The arrogance was gone. The smugness, the certainty, all of it melted away under the hot Carolina sun. For the first time in a very, very long time. He looked small, powerless, human. He walked slowly toward the boxes, touched one of them, then sat down on the curb like someone who had just realized the world didn't revolve around him after all. I closed the door. I didn't lock it right away. I stood behind it, listening to the silence. And I felt nothing. No sadness, no guilt, no triumph. Just peace and the sound of my own breathing. The kind you only hear when you're finally, completely alone in the best possible way. He didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. I imagine it took him a while to figure out where to go. Friends don't rush to offer their couches when you've built your entire identity around having it all together. And mistresses don't usually stick around when the fantasy shatters, and the man underneath is stranded, broke, and reduced to cardboard boxes on a driveway. I watched from the window as the moving truck arrived. The two young men looked confused at first, probably expecting someone else to greet them. I handed them the list, pointed to the boxes, and told them exactly where to take everything. A short-term storage unit rented under his name, using his social security number, which I still had memorized after 30 years of filing taxes together. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. When they drove away, I turned back toward my house and closed the door with a finality I hadn't realized I was craving. It was done. At least for me. That evening, Emily showed up. She didn't knock, just let herself in the way she used to when she was little. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "What did you do to Dad?" I didn't look up from the sink where I was washing a plate. "I didn't do anything. He did this to himself." "Come on, Mom," she said. "You sent him to Colombia and then shut off your phone. That's not normal. You humiliated him." I set the plate down slowly. "You know what's not normal, Emily?" I said quietly. "Sleeping next to someone for 30 years and waking up one day to hear that you're boring, that your presence isn't enough, that you've become invisible in your own marriage. That isn't normal." She didn't answer, just stared. "And you know what else?" I continued. "He cheated with a woman he took on a trip I paid for. That's what your father did." Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't know. Of course she didn't. Richard, in all his dramatic retelling, had probably left that part out. 15 years ago, I added softly. "He did it the first time with someone you used to call Aunt Diane." Emily's eyes widened. "I found out. I stayed for you and Daniel. I stayed quiet so your childhood wouldn't fall apart." "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. "Because children shouldn't have to carry the sins of their parents," I said. "And because I still believed people could change, but he didn't." She sat down slowly at the kitchen table, suddenly looking like a child again. Her tough exterior cracked just a little. "Why now?" "Because I'm done," I said. "Because I finally chose myself." She didn't speak for a long time. Neither did I, and in that silence, something shifted. A heavy truth passed between us, raw, painful, but no longer hidden. The next morning, Daniel called. His voice was sharp, defensive. "You embarrassed him," he said. "He's devastated." "Good," I replied. There was a pause. I didn't know it was that bad." "I didn't want you to," I said. I told him the same truth I'd told Emily, letting it spill out like a confession that had waited far too long. And for once, there were no interruptions, no excuses, just silence on the other end of the line. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I added, "but I won't apologize for choosing mine." And that was the end of it. That weekend, I sold one of the cars, his car. The money went straight into a new account in my name only. I started separating everything, closing shared accounts, changing insurance policies, updating titles. Piece by piece, I reclaimed my life. Every small step felt like another thread being cut. I wasn't rushing. I was reclaiming. People think divorce is about rage, shouting matches, slammed doors, dramatic exits. But sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's just a woman with a list, a pen, and a heart that's done waiting for someone to finally recognize her worth. Sitting on my back porch with a cup of coffee, watching birds skim the tops of the trees, I thought, I have never felt more invisible and I have never felt more powerful. They came together. Daniel and Emily, my children, my blood. They stood on the front porch like a jury summoned to pass judgment. They didn't look angry. They didn't look kind either. Just confused, hurt, uncomfortable in that way people are when something they believed in starts to crumble. I opened the door and waited. Emily spoke first, her voice soft, uncertain. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. They sat in the living room, the same room where they once built forts from couch cushions, where I rocked them to sleep, where Christmas mornings exploded with torn wrapping paper and laughter. Now it was still, almost reverent, as if even the furniture knew something had changed. Daniel rubbed his hands together, staring at the rug. Emily wouldn't meet my eyes. He started. "We didn't know how bad it had gotten." I nodded. "I know. Why didn't you say anything?" Emily asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you act like everything was fine?" "Because that's what I was taught to do," I said quietly. "You hold the family together. You protect your children from pain. You make it work." I stood by the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside, the neighborhood was calm, normal. Then I turned around and finally said what I had never said out loud. "I knew about your father's first affair. 15 years ago." Both of them looked up at once. "It was with Diane. You remember her?" "Aunt Diane," Emily gasped. Daniel stared at me like the words didn't make sense. I found out by accident, I said. He left his email open. There were messages, photos, a flight itinerary, Mom. Emily whispered, covering her mouth. I confronted him. He denied it. Then he admitted it, he begged. Promised it was over. Said it meant nothing. And I believed him. Why? Daniel asked, almost angry, because you were both still in school. Because we'd just refinanced the house. And because being alone terrified me more than the betrayal. I finally sat down. My knees shaking not from pain, but from the weight of telling the truth after carrying it for so long. I stayed because I thought I could fix it. That if I gave enough time, loyalty, patience, he'd love me again. But I watched him pull away piece by piece until there was nothing left of the man I married. Just a stranger who took my silence as permission. Neither of them spoke. I'm sorry, I said. Not for what I did to him but for what I hid from you. Emily wiped her eyes. Daniel looked away. After a long pause, Emily whispered, you should have left him then, I know. I said, but I wasn't ready. Daniel nodded slowly. So what now? You're really divorcing him? No, I said. The prenup handled that. They both looked surprised. He signed it 30 years ago. Infidelity meant he walked away with nothing. He thought it was a joke. I didn't. They leaned back, quiet. Then Emily said something I never expected. I'm proud of you. She said it softly. Like a secret she wasn't sure she was allowed to say, but it landed in my chest like thunder. I smiled. Thank you, She paused. I wish I'd seen it sooner. I didn't want you to, I said. I wanted you to have a happy childhood. Even if it cost me mine. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred. They didn't stay long. They left together, arms brushing, walking more slowly than usual. When the door closed, I stood in the middle of the house that once held my entire life. Now it held something new. The truth. And for the first time finally I wasn't carrying it alone. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not searching for wrinkles or gray roots, but because for the first time in years, I recognized the woman looking back at me. Her eyes didn't look tired anymore. Her shoulders weren't slumped. There was something new in her expression, something fierce. For most of my adult life, I'd been looking past myself, at the kids, at Richard, at calendars and to-do lists, dentist appointments, and everyone else's needs. Now, for the first time in years, I looked at me. I pulled a notebook from the kitchen drawer, the one that used to hold grocery lists and expired coupons. I flipped to a blank page and wrote 3 words across the top in bold letters: start over now. Then I made a list: sell the SUV, close joint accounts, get a PO box, meet with a realtor, find a new place not too big but sunny, start sketching again, open that Etsy store I always talked about. Each line felt like lifting a shovel, digging up parts of myself that had been buried under 30 years of later. I made the calls to the bank, the lawyer, the realtor. I listed the SUV online, posted clean photos, and emptied the glove box. Inside was a half-used parking pass from one of Richard's work trips. I smiled and dropped it into the trash. That afternoon, I walked through the small strip of shops downtown, the ones I'd passed every Saturday, but never entered because Richard hated small business prices. I bought myself a leather-bound sketch pad, expensive, luxurious. I didn't hesitate when they rang it up. At home, I opened it and drew for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect. My hands were rusty. But it was mine. A landscape, and finished, open, free. Like me, when I told Emily and Daniel I was selling the house, they were stunned. But it's the house we grew up in, Daniel said, eyes wide. It's also the house I died in. I replied gently. Piece by piece. It's time. They didn't argue. They helped me pack what was left, the good memories, the heirlooms, the holiday decorations I couldn't part with. I donated the old furniture, called the realtor, and listed the house within a week. When the offers came in, I chose the one from a young couple with a baby on the way. Let it hold joy again. Let it be someone else's beginning. I signed the papers on a Wednesday and closed the door for the last time. That evening, I moved into a bright 2-bedroom condo on the edge of town. It had a balcony overlooking a park, morning light that spilled across the hardwood floors, and a small spare room I turned into a studio. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a status symbol. It was freedom. My phone buzzed that first night. Richard, please. Just talk to me. I didn't reply. I stood on my new balcony, stared up at the stars, and whispered into the dark. You had your chance, because the truth was, I had begged for years for attention, for affection, for kindness. And now that I was gone, he finally heard me, but I wasn't speaking to him anymore. I was speaking to myself. And for the first time, I was listening. I was unpacking the last box, the one labeled Carolyn's desk, filled with old journals, pens, paper clips, and faded thank you cards. When I heard the knock, soft, hesitant, not the way Richard used to knock when he thought He owned the space behind the door. I knew it was him before I even looked. Through the peephole, he stood there in a wrinkled blue button-down, holding nothing. His hands were empty. So was his face stripped of arrogance, charm, every layer he'd ever worn as armored Carolyn. He said when I opened the door, I didn't invite him in. He didn't expect me to. I found your new place, he added, glancing at the number on the door. Emily told me. I asked her not to, but she thought you might want to hear me out. I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. You shouldn't have come. I know, he looked smaller than the last time I'd seen him, not in height, but in presence, like the world had finally caught up with him and started collecting what he owed. He ran a hand through his hair, grayer than I remembered. I came to say I'm sorry. Silence. I was a coward, he said. Selfish, blind, pathetic. I still said nothing. I didn't see what I had. I thought I could replace what I lost with something shiny and easy. But the truth is, nothing I ever had with anyone else came close to what I destroyed with you. I let his words hang there. I didn't soften. I didn't lean toward him. While he had been breaking me down one quiet day at a time, I had been rebuilding myself. I know I don't deserve anything from you, he said. Not forgiveness. Not sympathy. But I needed to face you. I needed to look into your eyes and know you heard it. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. You left a long time ago, Richard. This isn't about Cartagena or Maya or some hotel that didn't exist. This is about every silent dinner, every ignored moment. Every time you looked past me like I was just furniture in the room. He dropped his eyes. And I let you, I continued. I let you shrink me. I let myself disappear. He started to speak. But I stopped him, but not anymore. I stepped onto the balcony and gestured toward the view, trees swaying. Kids laughing in the park, dogs barking somewhere in the distance. This is my space now. My life. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. You're glowing, he said quietly. I nodded. That's what happens when you stop watering dead plants. He gave a faint smile. It wasn't sarcastic. It was sad, real. I don't have a home, he said softly. That's not my problem anymore, he nodded. Swallowed hard. I'll go now. I didn't stop him. He walked down the hallway slowly, like someone who didn't know where he was headed next. And maybe he didn't. I closed the door behind him. There were no tears, no regret. Just a calm, steady stillness, the kind that settles in when the past finally stops knocking. There are mornings now when the light pours in just right. For a moment, everything is still. No buzzing phone. No expectations. No tension humming beneath the surface of a too quiet breakfast table. Just the breeze, the warmth, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. I live for those mornings. My name is still Carolyn Whitaker. But I've changed in every way that matters. After Richard left my doorway that night, I didn't hear from him again, at least not directly. Emily said he was staying with a college friend across town, trying to get back on his feet. Daniel mentioned he'd picked up part-time consulting work. Neither of them pushed me. Not anymore. They saw the lines I'd drawn. They saw the woman I had become. And more importantly, they respected her. In the months that followed, I sold the last of our shared possessions, finalized the legal and financial separation, and invested in something I never thought I'd have again, myself. I opened that online store, Sketch and Soul. It's small, but it's mine. People order prints of my drawings, landscapes, abstract emotions, scenes pulled from memory. Each one carries a piece of the quiet, powerful shift that saved me. Once a week, I teach an art class at the local community center. Women show up, older, younger, some heartbroken, some just tired, and we sit in a circle sketching, shading, sharing stories between pencil strokes. We don't always talk about what we've lost. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's a shared silence between people who finally chose themselves. Most mornings, I walk through the park. There's an oak tree along the path with a bench beneath it. I sit there with a thermos of coffee, watching joggers pass, kids chase one another. Dogs bark at squirrels. The world keeps spinning, but lighter, cleaner. One day, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was short. Carolyn, I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. I never understood how much damage I caused until I had to sit with it in silence. And I finally see that the silence you gave me was louder than anything you could have said. I'm sorry for everything. And thank you for setting me free, too. Richard folded it neatly and slid it into the back of my sketch pad. Not because I needed to keep it, but because it was the final chapter. The ending of a story I never asked to write, but finished anyway. A woman doesn't always get justice in courtrooms or public apologies. Sometimes she gets it in the quiet decision to choose herself after decades of being everyone else's anchor, and when she finally releases the weight she was never meant to carry, something remarkable happens. She floats. I'm sitting on my balcony now, watching the sun sink behind the trees. Sketchbook resting on my lap, pencil in hand. And for the first time in my life, I don't need anyone to see me because I see myself. And I love the view. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice truly matters.